Let's bring in this very impressive guest now, Advanced Lieutenant Colonel and former head of the Hostage Affairs Unit for the Israeli Defense Force, Avi Kalo, joins me now live from Israel. Avi, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. You were actually quite involved in this negotiation as well. One of the elements that's been so controversial are the 1,200 Palestinian criminals and terrorists who will be released from Israeli prisons. Can you tell us a bit about that process and where they'll be sent offshore and how Israeli families who are victims of those terrorists would have to be notified?
Yeah, thanks, Sherry, for having me first. And we do hope for, obviously, the outcome of this crisis, current tactical crisis, to be end soon, and the deal will start to embark, hopefully, early next week. So with regard to what you've been asking, there is a unique procedure here in Israel that deals with the aspects of a victim of terror that been offended by those massive murders that are going to be released during this hostage deal, that have the entitlement to approach the Supreme Court in Israel, who, as you know, highly prestigious on the international community as well, to appeal against the government for the release of those accused murderers. The DOJ, the Israel Department of Justice, must publish 48 hours prior to the release of those mass murderers who've been in jail, obviously, for dozens of years, most of them for life sentence. So the DOJ must publish the list of the prisoners, and the families has the ability to, obviously, to appeal to the Supreme Court and claim against the release. Usually, Supreme Court in Israel keeps the freedom of action for the political level in this regard, and usually does not interfere in such a political decision, which is obviously a common practice not only in Israel but also on global scale.
So this is a very complicated national security process for Israel because it's going to be releasing hardened criminals, including terrorists who committed, terror attacks. It has been said that Israel will be sending some of these offshore, overseas. Where will they go?
Well, at least according to initial understandings here on the local arena, I would say that they are going to be deported abroad from Israel. Some of them, definitely not to the West Bank, where there is a high tension between Israelis and Palestinians back there on the Palestinian cities of the West Bank. Most of the origins of those prisoners are from the West Bank. So they are going to be released mainly abroad in order to obviously minimize the threat that they are setting for the national security of the Israeli people here. Main countries that you could consider is Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, and other Gulf states around the region here, and probably also some from Europe. For example, in the Shalit deal, which you mentioned earlier in the previous interview, some of the prisoners were deported to Ireland and even to France. So we had some other opportunities back there. That depends on the, obviously, a negotiation that the government is dealing with other governments around the globe in order to deport those prisoners in a very specific, I would say, strict conditions about the way that they are going to handle the states where are going to be hosted in.
You think that would be a huge political issue in any European country that has to take these Palestinian terrorists. Now, you worked in, you led the Hostage Affairs Unit. Looking at this deal, is this the sort of deal you would have designed, 3 hostages being released each week? What do you think about that?
Well, it's extremely complicated negotiation, an extremely complicated deal that its origins are based on the Biden initiative set by President Biden on on May 2023. And obviously the situation is that we're talking here about a phased approach deal, which obviously stretch the timeline of the deal and make it even more complicated and more, I would say, concerned with regard to the possible implication of breaching such a deal due to the time frame that it needs to be conducting, meaning that we have a wide timeline of 3 months almost for the release of all those hostages in a very phased approach that actually meets at the end some tensions on ground. The battlefield is still kind of boiled in a way, and the tension on ground is obvious, and the IDF is obviously operationally ready for any clashes with the Hamas terrorists. So there may be some developments on ground that will take situation back in regard to the ability to implement the agreement once there will be clashes on ground. So it's going to be very complicated to implement such an agreement for such a long time of implementation.
We've had the breaking news, of course, tonight as we went to air that this hostage deal is not going to the Israeli cabinet, at least not this morning, Israel time, because Hamas has breached key elements of the deal. Do you expect this will get back on track?
Well, I do assess cautiously, as I know Hamas for almost 20 years, I would say, and I know also some of the mediators and the characters that are deeply involved in the negotiation currently. I would say cautiously that I would assess that at the end, those tactical, recent or just last-minute blackmails of Hamas, which is, by the way, a common practice that we know from terrorist organizations in the Middle East, not only Hamas, but also Hezbollah, conducted the same methods of operation when it was in hostages deal with this organization, this Lebanese organization back in 15 and 20 years ago. But same practices are being adopted by Hamas, by the brother of Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Sinwar, who's now taking the lead of Hamas on ground in Gaza. So we do assess that this last-minute crises are part of the need or the, I would say, stress of Hamas to gain some more assets before the final and deal is signed here. But I do assess
one
at
of
the
the
end
things
that,
they wanted was Sinwar's body. That was a demand that they kept making.
Well, Sinwar body obviously is captivated in the hands of the Israeli authorities currently, and if Israel will decide to release it, then it will have harsh demands for Hamas in this regard. We have some, as you know, Sherry, we have some soldiers who I've also personally been involved in the cases that have been kidnapped, and their remains are still in the hands of Hamas from the 2014 military campaign in Gaza.
Avi,
so we have some
out of time, but I am so grateful for you joining us tonight. Thank you very much for your expertise.